Well, today we're going to be wrapping up our 7-week fall series. We've been working with this book up here called Falling Upward, Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life by Richard Rohr. And these final 2 chapters are where we really get to see what he's talking about when he uses that metaphor of the second half of life. And in the book he summarizes it like this. He says, most of us tend to think of the second half of life as largely about getting old, dealing with health issues, and letting go of our physical life. But the whole thesis of this book is exactly the opposite. What looks like falling can largely be experienced as falling upward and onward into a broader and deeper world where the soul has found its fullness, is finally connected to the whole, and lives inside the big picture. You know, in many and even most ways, it's supposed to get better, despite the fact that we have to deal with the various things that happen to us physically as we get older. Karen and I look at each other. I mean, we're not that old yet, but we occasionally look at each other and shake our heads and say, this stuff ain't for sissies, you know. It's interesting. And you know, and I sincerely hope that none of us here ever find ourselves uttering the fateful words, is that all there is? Is that all there is? I mean, ideally, in the second half of life, we reach a point where we stop looking for more and learn how to better appreciate a reality that no longer has to be constrained by all of the different assumptions and rules that dominated the first half of life. Those assumptions and rules, of course, played an important part in our development, and now we get to move beyond them, if we're fortunate. In the first half of life, we live under the assumption that expansion and growth, at least in the physical realm, can go on indefinitely, and that's certainly the way that the economy operates. It operates under the assumption of continuous and ongoing growth, for better or worse. But how does that work when we get stuck applying it to other aspects of life? Well, life can turn into a pursuit of mindless materialism and this constant need to compare our own lifestyle to others. Think about the first half of life. Think about youth culture. In fact, I think we live in a persistent youth culture even now and everywhere, but certainly the first half of life is dominated by this persistent youth culture where there's this pressure to dress young, to act young, talk young, and especially look young. And I sometimes wonder if as a culture we're not valuing the aging process and our elders in particular. That's the problem when that first half of life assumption dominates. The first half of life is characterized by what the author calls a dualistic mindset. A dualistic mindset. It's a level of consciousness that pursues black and white, either or kind of thinking. And at some point, we need to move beyond that kind of thinking. And I think we can understand the reason why we want to move beyond that kind of thinking when we look at what the author calls the 7 characteristics of the dualistic mind. Here's a quote from the book. He says, "At the risk of being too cleverly alliterative, though it may help you to remember, here is the normal sequencing of the dualistic mind. It compares, it competes, it conflicts, it conspires, it condemns, it cancels out any contrary evidence, and it then crucifies with impunity. You can call it the 7 C's of delusion and the source of most violence." Now notice some of the highlighting I did up there. He calls it normal. He says it's the normal sequencing. So this isn't an aberration. It's a necessary stage or phase, but not one that we want to stay in for the obvious reasons he points out there at the end, at the last line. Delusion, violence, those are not healthy things. So, one of the goals we can set for ourselves during the second half of life is to get beyond that kind of dualistic either-or thinking and grow into a state of consciousness that will serve us better. Something that he describes in this next quote. He says, "More calm and contemplative seeing does not appear suddenly, but grows almost unconsciously over many years of conflict, confusion, healing, broadening, loving, and forgiving reality. It emerges gradually as we learn to, as Jesus put it, forgive the enemies, both within and without. You no longer need to divide the field of every moment between up and down, totally right and totally wrong, with me or against me. It just is. This calm allows you to confront what must be confronted with even greater clarity and incisiveness." And of course, what we are always and ultimately going to have to confront, what we must confront, are the great matters of life and death. What do we make of it? And notice that once again the author cites the example of something Jesus talked about forgiving enemies. He talks about Jesus, which is no surprise because he is a priest in the Franciscan order. And these references are something we really should be comfortable with in Unity, because even though we don't have a theology based on what I call the 3 S's, which are sin, Satan, and salvation, that's not part of our theological vocabulary, we do study the example of Jesus as one of the world's notable spiritual teachers. But instead of worshiping him, we try to be more like him, to embody his teachings, do what he said, be like him. And if we want to keep it really simple, we could just focus on the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, examples of the qualities that we might want to embody to get closer to that benchmark of virtue that we call the Christ. And it's fitting that we're going to be finishing this series just as we start the Christmas season, because in Unity, Christmas is all about the Christ, which is a word that we use. It's not Jesus' last name, all right? It's a descriptive word that we use to describe the very best aspects of our humanity, our in many cases unrealized potential for good and virtuous behavior. Now, he mentioned at the top of the service that this is the first Sunday of Advent, and a few years back there was a Christmas issue of Unity magazine where Reverend Greg Barrett wrote a very short piece about the symbolic meaning of Advent and Christmas. And here's one of the things he said about it. "Christmas is the yearning within each soul for an awakening into a new state of being, the birth of something new within the self. Through the birth, embodiment of the Christ among humanity, Jesus stands in for each one of us when we were attempting to move into a new possibility during chaotic or difficult times." Yearning, that's literally what Advent means. Waiting, anticipating, right? Like the ketchup commercial. Anticipation, right? You'll never forget what Advent means if you just think of ketchup, right? Anticipation, yearning. And there's a lot more that's packed into that seemingly short quote. A lot more packed into the quote, which gives us a good start when we come to trying to update and reinterpret what we mean by the word Christ and the significance of Advent. And this really is a summary of our task, our real quest during the second half of life. These 3 key ideas that we're trying to develop and embody. So here they are. Awakening into a new state of being, the birth of something new within the self. The birth, embodiment of the values and virtues that Jesus advanced, and embracing the second half of life as presenting new possibilities, opportunities, and things like that. Another way of looking at the second half of life in the context of this Christmas story is to see it as the start of a spiritual awakening. Not the spiritual awakening, but one of many that humankind has experienced throughout history. I think it's helpful to see Advent and the Christmas season and the second half of life as an invitation to embrace a higher order of values, which we again see in the life and teachings of Jesus. You know, each one of the candles over there in our Advent wreath represents some key ideas. Today was hope and faith, and also peace, love, and joy. I think we might all agree that it would be a very good idea for the world to spend more time reflecting on those values than we do during the rest of the year. And if it takes the Christmas season to sort of jog us and move us into doing that, then let's do it. And I think when we look at it that way, as this opportunity to reflect on those values, I think it's a lot easier to ignore the kind of things that we might judge and condemn as commercialism and consumerism during the season. You know, it seems like everyone is celebrating Christmas these days, and a lot of it has nothing to do with Jesus and Christianity. There's the commercial side, of course. Black Friday, which we just got through, Cyber Monday is on its way, right? And if the only meaning that Christmas has for some people is the idea of buying and giving gifts, decorating the house and having holiday parties, so what? What's the harm? Why should I let it bother me? You know, at least people, when they're doing those things, at least they're working to be maybe a bit less selfish and maybe more other-oriented and generous. You know, I've never understood the Christmas Puritans who moan and groan every year because it's too commercial, or people are saying Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, or Starbucks doesn't have the right kind of cups and that kind of thing. In fact, I think there's really this wonderful, satisfying irony in the whole thing. Because think of it this way. The early church really tried to hijack pagan solstice celebrations by decreeing that Jesus was born around the time of the winter solstice, even though nobody knows exactly when he was born. I mean, what few clues there are in the Gospels points to a time perhaps during the spring. So, December 25th was chosen as a pretext for trying to convert the pagans and to hijack their holidays and customs. And it worked so well. It worked so well that now these traditions are like inextricably woven together. And it makes no sense to try to argue that it was meant to be all religious or all secular. You know, that's some more of that dualistic either or thinking that's so prevalent during the first half of life, during first half consciousness. And it always seems to be looking for problems to solve and something to complain about. It's one of the hallmarks of first half consciousness. Remember A Charlie Brown Christmas? There's that great line from A Charlie Brown Christmas where Linus says to Charlie Brown, "You're the only person I know who can take a wonderful season like Christmas and turn it into a problem." First half consciousness strikes again, turning everything into a problem, right? It took both religious and secular traditions to make Christmas what it is today. Both and. So, instead of either or, we see it as both and. And those who insist on stripping away one strand or the other do more harm than good. Because it seems almost as if without trying, we've achieved a balance in our culture between religious and secular Christmas displays, symbols, music. I mean, why can't we just leave it that way instead of turning it into another excuse for a pie fight? You know, there's another line from a Christmas episode of the brilliant TV show Northern Exposure that I've always remembered. It was delivered by Chris Stevens, who is the erudite radio announcer and humanist minister in the fictional town of Sicily, Alaska, right? And on Christmas Eve, he's doing a late night broadcast where he says this line. He says, Christmas reveals itself to each of us in a personal way, be it secular or sacred. Whatever Christmas is, and it's many things to many people, we all own a piece of it. Kind of like Santa's bag. Inside there's a gift for everyone. That's what second half consciousness does. Not just at Christmas, though. We learn to see the possibilities and the gifts that can lie beneath the surface, behind the appearance of things. That's what second half consciousness does. It anticipates awakening and growth, and it looks for the good. And may we learn to do the same this Christmas season. See you next week. Thank you.